the real lie of Benghazi that underlies all the current hyperbole in Washington. When the Republicans and the Democrats, by and large, had identical policies in Libya, it is really makes this macabre carnival seem even more insensitive when you think that all this national and international oxygen is being used about the deaths of 4 Americans. 4 American deaths screams louder than a tidal wave of violence and murder that exceeds, just in the last 18 months since NATO began bombardment, all the deaths through violence in Libya since the 1969 revolution. The murder and rape rate has gone up by 3,000% since NATO started bombing. Most of this damage done by the people that we intervened to unleash on the country. Armed gangs, many of them extremely religious fundamentalist types, many with links to extremist organizations that we knowingly armed. All of this makes the press and the Washington establishment seem utterly incompetent, deranged, or morally asleep at the wheel to be arguing over such minutiae in the face of such overwhelming devastation. The facts I'm going to state are drawn from double-referenced, reputable sources. They are indisputable fact. They are not loosely researched opinions. The real lie was using a hypothetical massacre, the specter of Gadaffi massacring the population of Benghazi, to rush through a resolution drafted by the United States, UN 1972, that was meant to impose a no-fly zone while the African Union sought to enter into negotiations for peace talks with the Gadaffi government. However, immediately the rebels were swept aside, and the United States converted that into an open season on the Gadaffi government, becoming the primary belligerent, with the rebels left to function simply as ragtag gangs that overran into the areas. The Western precision bombing, along with special forces from Britain, France, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, who the heaven knows where else during this time. The special forces units probably were equal to 1/4 of Libya's entire armed forces, and these are elite special forces from all of these different countries, not standard rank and file infantrymen. The absolute press silence about the #1 position in Africa that Libya occupied, rivaling Chile and Argentina in the Human Development Index of the United Nations, having the best scores in housing and food security in Africa and most of the Mideast, and the highest development metrics such as lifespan, education, 1 year greater education per female than in the United States, higher test scores in high school in some cases, lower violent crime rate, lower poverty rate. Never were any of the achievements of the '69 revolution of Gaddafi mentioned, yet its faults were exaggerated to caricature a madman. In fact, Gaddafi was a highly intelligent, idiosyncratic, idealistic, utopian, eccentric, bullying, probably exceptionally brilliant man, considering he was born as a Bedouin. And few would not argue that Libya was governed by a police state, like in African Cuba. Seldom is it mentioned that Gaddafi disarmed in exchange for, quote, improved relations with the West, unquote. What a chilling message this would send to any other country deciding to disarm for improved relations with the United States, and they see how well it served Gaddafi. Had the West attempted diplomacy with the Libyan leadership of the '69 revolution, as it itself had sworn to do in UN Resolution 1972, and had that diplomacy been successful, and it certainly would have been by June, the loyalists were begging to have internationally monitored elections because they could see what was happening and that the walls were closing in. Had diplomacy been successful, then the treasury of Benghazi would not have been looted. The greatest loss in all of archaeological history, according to the couple of articles that got out about the loss of billions of dollars worth of gold coins from 300 BC, an entire vast chamber of them stolen in Benghazi. If we had tried diplomacy and it had succeeded, many mosques and libraries would not have been destroyed that are now destroyed, as well as Christian churches. Many tombs of Sufi saints would not have been desecrated. Thousands of women would not have been raped and sexually assaulted and murdered. Tens of thousands of women or hundreds of thousands would not have been bullied and had their rights reduced by a new, more conservative legislature had diplomacy been tried. Because you see, the liberal elements are on the left, and they have been bullied into silence. And that tens of thousands would never have been put into squalid concentration camps run by armed thugs practicing torture and killing, as has been commonly reported in the New York Times about the new post-NATO intervention in Libya. The cities of Sirte, Tuareg, and Bani Walid, of 70,000, 30,000, and 60,000 respectively, roughly, would not have been battered into rubble and collectively punished and ethnically cleansed had diplomacy succeeded. The country would not be weak and divided and ruled by local warlords with no personal security in vast stretches of the country. 10% of the population would not have fled had negotiations been successful. The libraries of Timbuktu would not have been burned, the greatest heritage of all of Africa, the empire of Songhai, where the Islamic scribes wrote in the year 1450 AD. At that time, could have fielded a larger mailed cavalry, 45,000 strong, than all the European countries combined, as I understand it at the time. It was an empire of greatness, and all of its libraries were put to the torch by jihadists that would have never been there had we succeeded in diplomacy in Libya instead of bombardment. There would have been no coup in Mali. Jihadists would not have flocked to Libya. Battle-hardened jihadists would not have gone to Syria after completing their mission in Libya. Women would not have lost the right to veto their husband marrying a second wife, which now a husband can marry the second wife without the wife's permission. 10% of the population, many most experienced and educated, would not face ban and harassment with the new exclusion law. The liberals are being silenced and bullied by the conservatives who are joined at the hip with the most heavy duty of the armed factions who surrounded the ministries and demanded that anyone who had any remote connection to a government that was in power for nearly 45 years should be allowed to have any influence in public life. Lobotomizing the intellectual class. Black foreign workers would not have been terrorized along with Libyan blacks. Homes would not have been seized by capitalist reactionaries. There are now people throwing people out of homes that they were given to as part of land reform by the original landowning class, pulling out their old monarchist period property rights, which is all fine and well under proper court supervision, but it should not reverse the gains of fundamental land reform in eliminating housing insecurity. Chris Stevens would be working with election monitors had we tried diplomacy instead of bombing. Overseeing greater transparency in Libya, he would not be dead. In Libya now, 60% of all schools are damaged, billions in telecom, the entire armed forces and all of its equipment, billions in property damage. None of this would have occurred had we tried diplomacy. The psyche of people permanently changed by dragging them through war and chaos, down to the little children, would not have occurred. 20,000 rebels and their supporters would still be alive had diplomacy succeeded. No, the country might have seen an orderly election, a rapidly democratizing Libya with a nonviolent transformation, a more open country politically was possible. Certainly by June of last year, the lawyers were begging for such. If this is the case, the collective leadership of the West is guilty of the most massive international war crimes possible, similar to what Congressman Dennis Kucinich referred to as international gangsterism. The use of this peacekeeping resolution, UN 1973, to have the African Union secure a peace agreement between both sides. Instead, the rebellion was sidelined by a now primary belligerent NATO, led fundamentally by the United States. This could not have happened without the United States assistance. No longer were the rebels needed to be anything more than an armed mob, as NATO assured their success by annihilating and demolishing everything in their path with their discharge of 7,000 payloads of aerial munitions. Payloads, that's full discharges of a Kraft's complement of bombardment, 7,000 times against an army of 30,000 people. That's like one entire plane attack on every 4 soldiers. It's quite mind-boggling. And the wreckage and carnage you can see of the burnt tanks and the burnt vehicles with the charred bodies inside them are grim reminders of these if you look through the photo archives that they don't want you to see. If this is indeed international gangsterism, there must be war crimes trials for the NATO leadership, for Rasmussen, for Hillary Clinton, for Nicolas Sarkozy and Cameron and Rice and Obama and the Emir of Qatar and the Saudi forces involved. And shame on all of us for allowing this to happen again and be fooled again as we were fooled in Vietnam with the false Gulf of Tonkin resolution, killing 3 million Japanese, being fooled in Iraq, being fooled in sacrificing our constitutional rights for 9/11. How can we continually be fooled again and again? Thank you. My name is Alexander Hagan. Good night and good luck.